At 47 years of age, many felt Joey's race-winning days were over on the big bikes. But at the 1999 Ulster Grand Prix, lining up with new road race hotshot David Jeffries, he proved them wrong at record pace.
Last week, I covered the history and fatalities of the Isle of Man TT, a race often called the most dangerous in the world, a place where riders push themselves to the absolute limit on public roads, knowing that one small mistake can result in death. But the TT isn't the only race like that. Just across the Irish Sea, on a stretch of ordinary countryside roads outside Belfast, there's another event that has built a similar reputation. One that's just as fast, just as unforgiving, and in some ways, even more extreme. That race is the Ulster Grand Prix. Some of the fastest road racers on the planet arrive at the Dundrod Circuit to compete at speeds most people would never associate with narrow country lanes. For 1 week, quiet villages and farmland are transformed into one of the fastest racetracks in the world. There are no wide runoff areas, no gravel traps, and no real margin for error. Since racing began here in the 1950s, more than 24 riders, officials, and spectators have lost their lives on this course. Some were young riders chasing their first big breakthrough, others were experienced veterans who had raced here for years. All of them knew the risks before they ever lined up on the grid. For many competitors, the Ulster Grand Prix represents the ultimate test. It's where courage, skill, and control are pushed right to the edge, where one perfect lap can define a career, and one mistake can end it. This is the story of the Ulster Grand Prix. The danger of the Ulster Grand Prix doesn't start with the riders, it starts with the roads themselves. The Dundrod Circuit is a 7.5-mile loop that winds through open countryside and small settlements on the outskirts of Belfast. It's a place that, outside of race week, looks completely unremarkable. Quiet lanes, long straights, narrow junctions, and gentle bends that were never meant to handle racing motorcycles at full throttle. But once the roads are closed, everything changes. Temporary barriers go up, spectator banks are built, marshals take their positions, and suddenly, these narrow lanes become a high-speed circuit where riders are expected to push machines to their absolute limit. What separates Dundrod from many other road courses is just how fast it is. This isn't a technical stop-start circuit with tight hairpins and slow corners. It's built around momentum. Average lap speeds here are among the highest in road racing, and for long stretches, riders are simply holding on and trusting their instincts. There is very little forgiveness built into the layout. If a rider runs wide, there's rarely space to recover. Unlike permanent circuits, there's no buffer zone to absorb mistakes. Once control is lost, the outcome is usually decided in seconds. Another challenge is how inconsistent the surface can be. Dundrod is made up of different layers of tarmac laid down over decades. Some sections offer strong grip while others feel slippery, especially in cooler or damp conditions. Riders have to memorise exactly where they can push and where they need to hold back, and even then, conditions can change from lap to lap. The Ulster Grand Prix was first held in 1922, and in its earlier decades it was run on much longer road circuits around the Clady area. There were fatalities here, even on these slower, longer circuits. For example, on the 15th of August 1951, when Santi Geminiani and Gianni Leone collided and were both killed. Over time, the layout was gradually shortened and reshaped, first after the Second World War and then again in the early 1950s. In 1953, the race was moved onto the 7.4-mile Dundrod Circuit, the fast, compact layout that is still pretty much used today. It did have a little bit of a revamp in the 1960s. It was this change, more than anything else, that transformed the Ulster Grand Prix into the high-speed event that it is now. With the new layout in place, average speeds rose dramatically. The circuit became tighter, faster and more intense, with long flowing sections that encouraged riders to stay flat out for extended periods. The speed of the machines also progressed too. It didn't take long for the dangers of Dundrod to become clear. In the early years, protective equipment was minimal. Helmets offered limited protection, leathers were thin by today's standards, and medical support at the circuit was nowhere near what it is now. Crashes were often dealt with by marshals and fellow riders, long before professional medical teams could arrive. On the 11th of August 1955, just a few years after changing to the new layout, the Ulster Grand Prix claimed its first life on the circuit. It was the 27th running of the Ulster Grand Prix, and 28-year-old Julian Crossley was competing in the 350cc class of the FIM World Motorcycle Championship. At 28, he was classed as an experienced rider, and had competed in different racing events throughout his 20s. Crossley was taking part in his 8th lap whilst riding an AJS 350 when everything went wrong. He was approaching the Leathamstown corner, a fast and technical section of the circuit, when he lost control of his bike. Witnesses later described how the machine struck the roadside bank, launching Crossley over the handlebars. The impact was violent, and he suffered devastating head injuries. Marshals and medical staff reached him quickly, but he was unconscious and in critical condition. He was taken from the circuit to Lagan Valley Hospital before being transferred to the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast, where doctors fought to save his life. News of the crash spread quickly through the paddock and beyond. Crossley was a respected and experienced rider, not a reckless newcomer. He had competed regularly on the British racing scene and had recently finished 7th overall at the Mid-Antrim 150 just a few weeks earlier. He was known as capable, committed, and a competitor who understood the risks of road racing. Sadly, his condition worsened, and his friends and family gathered at his bedside. Among them was Formula One driver Mike Hawthorne, a close friend of the Crossley family, who visited the hospital several times after learning how serious the situation had become. Sadly, Julian Crossley never regained consciousness. 11 days after the crash, on August 22nd, 1955, he passed away from his injuries at the age of 28. At the time of his death, Crossley was married and living in Surrey, England. He left behind his wife, his parents John and Lettice Crossley, and a family suddenly forced to confront the brutal reality of the sport he loved. A subsequent inquest ruled his death as accidental, and the verdict offered little comfort. Julian Crossley became the first fatality in the modern era of the Ulster Grand Prix at Dundrod, but he would not be the last. His death marked a turning point. From that moment on, every rider who lined up at Dundrod did so knowing that someone had already paid the ultimate price for competing there. The list of names would only grow from there, with the next death coming just 1 year later in 1956, when Derek Ennett, a talented 24-year-old from the Isle of Man, was competing on a Works Moto Guzzi, when he lost control at an S-bend near Boudor after hitting a slippery patch on the road. Travelling at 100 miles per hour, his bike struck a bank and collided with a telegraph pole, killing him almost instantly. Deaths at the Ulster Grand Prix have always been less frequent than at the Isle of Man TT, but they have remained a tragic part of the event's history. Since the first fatality in 1955, more than 20 riders and passengers have lost their lives at Dundrod across races, practice sessions, and support events. These deaths have spanned decades. Some crashes were caused by mechanical failures, others by changes in grip, small misjudgments, or simply bad luck. But not every serious accident at Dundrod ends in tragedy. Over the years, there have also been crashes so violent that spectators were certain they had just witnessed a fatality, only for the rider to somehow survive. No crash represents that better than one of the most famous accidents in Ulster Grand Prix history, Guy Martin's 2015 crash. By the mid-2010s, few riders in road racing were as well known as Guy Martin. He wasn't just a frontrunner at the TT and the Northwest 200, he was also a television presenter, a mechanic, and one of the most recognisable faces in British motorsport. His laid-back personality and honesty made him hugely popular with fans, and wherever he raced, attention followed. In August 2015, he arrived at Dundrod for the Ulster Grand Prix, determined to be competitive. During the Superbike race, everything changed in an instant. At high speed, Martin lost control of his bike and was thrown violently onto the road. The crash happened so quickly that many spectators barely had time to react. His machine was destroyed, and his body slid heavily along the tarmac and grass banking before coming to rest. From the sidelines, it looked catastrophic. Marshals and medical staff rushed to the scene, and the race was immediately red flagged. Martin was airlifted to hospital and placed in intensive care, where doctors began to assess the full scale of his injuries. He had fractured several vertebrae in his back, broken multiple ribs, and suffered a collapsed lung. He was in severe pain and had narrowly avoided life-threatening internal damage. For a period, there were serious concerns about whether he would ever be able to race again, but true to form, he refused to stay put. Just 4 days later, despite still being in pain and barely recovered, he signed himself out of hospital and returned home. Friends and doctors later admitted they were shocked by how quickly he left, but Martin insisted he wanted to recover on his own terms. He later released this statement. It reads, "I've had my head down for a few weeks because I didn't want the world knowing I spanned myself, but it turns out the world already knew. I also wanted to make sure that anything you heard was straight from the horse's mouth. I don't remember anything about the crash after headbutting the ground, but the Dainese and the AGV stuff I was racing in was bloody brilliant. The leathers were cut off me, but there weren't many scuffs on them. I headbutted the ground at 130 miles per hour, then skidded into the dirt field and catapulted off a few things. The impact I hit the ground with was massive. I was knocked out. It's a credit to that helmet that I didn't suffer any damage other than a badly bloodshot eye. I've broken some vertebrae, but I've got to say the Dainese back protector did its job. I crashed on Thursday night, I was operated on Friday afternoon, and walking Saturday morning. That back protector genuinely saved my bloody life. My sternum is cracked straight down the middle, but that's only cartilage, so they don't do anything to try and repair it. I broke 5 ribs, 2 metacarpals in the right hand, and my hand's been plated. I still want to race, but I'm not going to rush into deciding what or where I'm going to race. So thanks again for all the best wishes and all the messages." Although Martin did return to racing, the Dundrod crash marked a turning point in his career. Over the following years, he gradually stepped back from full-time competition, focusing more on television work, engineering projects and personal challenges. In 2017, he officially announced his retirement from road racing, explaining that the risks and the physical toll were no longer worth it. Although Guy escaped with his life, the same can't be said about our next racer, Andy Wallace. In August 2004, at just 25 years old, Andy Wallace from Inverness arrived at the Ulster Grand Prix for the first time in his career. He was still early in his journey, but already showing serious promise. Earlier that year, he had impressed at the Northwest 200 and made a strong debut at the Isle of Man TT, marking him as one of Scotland's most exciting young talents, but disaster struck during the opening lap of the first race. Approaching Wheeler's Corner, one of the fastest and most exposed sections of the Dundrod Circuit, several bikes became tangled in a high-speed incident. Witnesses later described how one rider went off into a field, another lost control, and then multiple riders piled behind. Andy's Suzuki was caught in the chaos. His bike struck the roadside bank, triggering a devastating multi-rider collision involving at least 5 machines. The impact was fatal. Andy Wallace was killed instantly at the scene. 2 other riders, Mark Parrott and Ian Watson, were seriously injured and taken to hospital. A spectator was also hurt. Racing was suspended as medical teams worked at the site, and when competition eventually resumed, the race distance was reduced. For many in the paddock, the loss was deeply personal. Friends and fellow riders described Andy as a natural talent, quiet, hard-working and determined. One close friend said he was destined to be a star, believing he had what it took to reach the very top of the sport. Perhaps the saddest and most tragic death in the history of the Ulster Grand Prix is that of Jamie Hodson. In August 2017, he was competing at the Dundrod 150 Challenge, which is a support event of the Ulster Grand Prix. Jamie was killed in an accident that also involved his younger brother Rob Hodson. It was Rob's first time racing here, and Jamie had been following closely behind him when everything unfolded in seconds. As Rob clipped the grass verge and came off his bike, Jamie swerved instinctively to avoid him. 4 riders behind tried to scatter, but Jamie was thrown from his machine and struck a telegraph pole at high speed. He suffered catastrophic head injuries, went into cardiac arrest, and later died in hospital. Their father, himself a former racer, was watching from the paddock that day. At first he didn't even realise his sons were involved. Then the waiting began. Rob walked away with an injured ankle, unaware at first how badly Jamie had been hurt. The family were given just 40 minutes with him before he passed away. In the days that followed, Rob spoke about how the moment still lived in his mind, saying the disaster happened in 5 or 6 seconds and never truly left him. At the inquest, it was ruled that nothing more could realistically have been done. Jamie's death, coming after years of success and just weeks after a top 10 TT finish, was a devastating blow. A champion, a teammate, a brother and a son lost whilst trying to avoid harming his own sibling. Now, unlike the Isle of Man TT, which has continued to grow and evolve, the Ulster Grand Prix has not returned since 2019. After decades as one of the fastest and most demanding road races in the world, the event quickly came to a halt. Cancellations in the years that followed, caused by financial pressures, insurance costs, and organisational difficulties, meant that Dundrod fell silent. In a tragic twist of fate, the final full meeting took place just 1 year after the death of Fabrice Miguet, the last rider to lose his life at the circuit. For many, it has felt like an end of an era. However, there is still hope. Plans are in place to bring the Ulster Grand Prix back, with organisers aiming for a return in 2027 under new management and safety structures. If successful, it would mark not just the revival of a famous race, but a new chapter, one built on lessons learned and improved safety. Whether Dundrod comes back to life or remains part of history, the legacy of the Grand Prix will always endure. From Julian Crossley and Andy Wallace to Jamie Hodson and many more, their names remain woven into the roads of Dundrod forever. And personally, I hope the race returns. What do you think? Let me know. Or may everyone who has lost their lives here rest in peace. As always, this is not an AI channel, I do everything myself, so if you appreciate my work, subscribe, and if you want to go that extra step to support the channel, maybe consider becoming a member. Let me know what you thought about this case in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching.